This guy. This guy's a character. He's also not relevant to this video, so there'll be no further discussion about him. Today, I'm launching a new series of videos all about characters, because apparently I'm incapable of making a video that's not part of a series. I'm going to call this the Incomplete Guide to Characters, because the series isn't done yet, and calling it the Complete Guide to Characters seems a bit disingenuous. We'll go through all the major elements of characters: motivation, flaws, goals, change, how to make them likable, hateable, sympathetic, memorable. We've covered a lot of these things in earlier videos, but I'm running out of ideas for I want to cover them again in a bit more of a holistic manner. Talk about how each element contributes to a well-rounded character and how these elements interact with each other. Before we get to all that, though, I want to take a step back and ask one simple question. Why are characters a thing in the first place? What purpose do they serve in the story? Why does practically every single story have characters in it, rather than just being a plot and a setting? That was like 4 questions, but whatever. Stories fundamentally are about connection. Connection between the reader and the story. It is difficult for a reader to develop an emotional connection with the plot of a story alone. Even large epic stories describing entire wars fought between dozens of countries and millions of people are usually grounded in a handful of characters. If all we read about are the events and not the people involved in those events, the story is going to seem cold and emotionless. In this way, characters serve as a means to connect the reader to the story and to the events that take place within the story. And on the subject of events, stories are, when you boil it right down, about action. Actions drive events, which in turn drive the story and create the plot. Stories don't just describe the quality or the quantitative aspects of their subject or theme, but also explore them and show them changing through time in response to different events. So stories involve change. Change is driven by action, and the kind of action readers are most interested in is the kind that's driven by characters. Your life, when you think about it, is really driven by you doing stuff and other people doing stuff. And a lot of times, characters in stories tend to mirror these real-life decisions. That's why readers are so interested in reading about characters, because characters do the same kinds of things that affect the reader in their everyday life. If you've ever been attacked by a goose or struck by lightning, you'll have realized that a lot of the events that can affect your life aren't necessarily caused by people. And this is an important point that I want to emphasize. Characters in a story don't necessarily need to be human. You can just as easily write a story about whales or wolves or werewolves or were-whales as you can about people. This dramatically increases the scope of what can be considered a character, and also makes it a lot harder to find a story without characters in it. The important thing is that the actions of these non-people characters are usually personified in some way. You'll hear a lot of talk about character agency, about how characters need to drive the events of the plot rather than just having the events happening on their own. And the main reason for this is because that makes the story more realistic and relatable. Events that cause change rarely happen on their own. There is always an agent that causes that event, whether it's a person, an animal, a geological force, or gravity. Events are fundamental to making a story, no matter what causes them. Even if you strip away any remotely personified being from a story and only make it about the events, you are still technically describing something caused by an agent. It could be the wind rustling through the grass or the moonlight reflecting off the golden candelabra. You're still describing something causing something to happen to something else. Even if your story is about a rock sitting on another rock, that's still an agented action. A story needs to have characters because without them, there is no story. Even when you seemingly strip a narrative of all characters, there are still arguably personified agents doing things. driving the events of that story. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a story. Boy, this video kind of wandered all over the place, but I think these kinds of questions are important to ask. You should always, as a writer, understand why something is important to devote time to, even something as crucial as characters. And as we've talked about today, characters are a central part of storytelling, which is why we're going to be spending the next few weeks talking about them. Next week, we'll get into some of the more concrete elements about characters. This week was kind of just an introduction that was a bit more rambling than I had intended. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. I didn't really share any advice. Be sure to check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.